I have a few trolls on my channel who don't seem to have any lives of their own because they have so much time to comment on my videos, posting new huge blocks of text every single day, dripping with venom, full of insults and idiocy, expecting that I will prioritize them because they think they're so important that I must answer all their questions that they don't want answers to, even though they duck and dodge and habitually refuse to answer any of my questions for them. If you post a huge run on paragraph or long string of paragraphs full of misspellings and every wrong assumption you've ever made, don't expect me to read it all. I might read until the first major mistake, which is usually in the first sentence, and stop there. So you're only wasting your own time, not mine. I don't have that kind of time to give you. Some of these internet ninjas imagine that I am somehow scared of them, as if having a question that they think I can't answer is somehow a threat to my worldview. It's not, specifically because I do not have a belief system like they do. My position is just that I simply don't want to be fooled into believing anything that isn't evidently true, like they do. So I want to make sure that my information and my understanding of it is correct, where my critics obviously don't care about that at all. They just want to believe what they want to believe, regardless whether it's justified or not. They don't want to know any better. And they think it's okay to assert any assumption they just made as if it was a fact just because they assumed it. Because they have neither honor nor shame and don't even care if they're always wrong on every point every time. They're never going to admit or accept that because truth, honesty, accuracy, and accountability don't even matter to them like they do to me. YouTube doesn't pay me to argue with idiots in the comments, but it will pay for videos. So sometimes I challenge these people who think I'm afraid of them to come onto my channel and let's talk about this in real time. I'm right and they know it, so they usually hide so as not to have to admit it. They accuse me of hiding from them, as if I even could be afraid of them. Let's straighten that out first. If my critics were right, that would mean that I'm wrong. And I don't want to continue to believe things that are wrong like believers do. I want to know if it's wrong as soon as possible so that I can correct myself and not be wrong anymore, the way my critics still would be. Because my worldview is not a belief system like the liars pretend that it is, trying to project their own faults onto others as if I am them and they are me. There's so much projection and juxtaposition. Now, I have a short list of a few internet handles that are people that I know are just dishonest trolls and thus unworthy of my attention. And most of my other critics don't deserve it either, unless there's a reasonable possibility that they're sincere. And then it doesn't matter if they're so stupid that they don't know how stupid they are. I'm still going to try to help them anyway. I have to wonder about some of these people. Do they even know that they are only trolling? Is this person just an idiot, or are they just being a dick? Though I think trolls are usually both. Um, but I live in Texas, and we have an astounding number of genuine morons out here. I actually know several people personally, former friends and close family, neighbors, and so on, who really are every bit as dumb as the most idiotic trolls I've ever seen. I personally know plenty of people who would ask questions just like the ones that the trolls give me, and that they would only ask stupid questions, loaded questions based on faulty assumptions that will never be corrected, no matter what the answer is. They'll never ask a sincere question because they don't want to understand what they're afraid to believe. They're blinded by their bigotry and still want to pretend as if they know more than all the experts in any field on every subject that they've never even studied. Because I've known people who told me that first impressions cannot be wrong because they're not merely assumptions based on prejudice or what have you. That instead they are divinely guided. Your first impression was a gut reaction given to you by God, and therefore it cannot be wrong. Seriously, I've known some really stupid people in my life. So I'm going to treat these questions as if this is what some intellectual incompetent really thinks. I'm not going to type out replies in the comments because then only that one mental maladroit will ever see it, and they'll just ignore it unless everyone else sees it too. So my response should be in the form of a video, even if they refuse to take part in it, like this troll did. The troll I'm correcting this month. He said that he couldn't spare 1 hour of any day of any week because he has a job. Most of us have jobs, and All of us could spare 1 hour out of one day out of any given week. He's the only one who can't. He says that I don't have a job because he thinks that being self-employed means unemployed, as if being a writer and videographer doesn't even count as one job, much less two different ones, such as it is in my case. He says that I shouldn't have patrons because performing as a speaker or debater doesn't require any talent, and that researching, composing, and editing videos doesn't take any time. It typically does take dozens of hours per video, as if writing with deadlines for publishing doesn't count as work either, when in fact all that really means that I have more to do every day than I have time to do it. But most other people I know have hobbies or games to pass the time that I don't have to spare. Those who are self-employed usually work harder for themselves than they ever did for a boss. And I want my patrons to be proud of the fact that they support me, that they are the reason why I'm able to get any of this work done at all. And also, I think that this troll loves it when I beg for donations. So if you like what I do, please piss off this obviously envious critic by donating to my PayPal or Patreon. I want this guy to know that people donate more to me now because of him. Let me get to his questions that he thought would be so challenging to my worldview. They're in two categories. The first is science questions. Number one, since Einstein proved his theory of relativity that the universe had a beginning, how did everything, universe, material, come from nothing? The answer is that it didn't, and no one believes that it did. Well, creationists are the ones who think that everything was created ex nihilo, out of nothing. But atheists do not believe that. Creationists just like to lie about us and pretend that we're the ones doing whatever believers are really doing. And first of all, Einstein did not prove his theory of relativity. His theory made a couple of predictions that did come true, like the observation of gravitational lensing during the lunar eclipse in 1919, and again with the detection of gravitational waves a century later. Both times, public news media declared that Einstein's theory had been proven by these events. But don't trust journalists trying to report on science, because science has a rule that no theory can ever be claimed proven in a positive sense. This is partly because science considers that proof is only possible in mathematics, and it's also to keep scientists honest, which they won't be if they go around lying about having the absolute proof of the absolute truth like believers always do. If scientists were allowed to claim that any theory was ever positively proven, evolution would be the first one so declared. The theory of relativity doesn't prove the Big Bang. It just gives us a way to recognize cosmic inflation, which implies a Big Bang. However, the Big Bang is neither the creation of the universe nor the beginning of it. Even in models that have a singularity, that singularity is itself, in some sense, eternal. Material energy adheres to the first law of thermodynamics in that it always existed in some form. It was never created. So I would appreciate it if you'd stop telling the lie that atheists are supposed to believe that everything came from nothing when we don't believe that, and you do. Question number two. How did all life come from non-life material? Has that ever been duplicated and observed by science? Well, that's really two questions, isn't it? But I can give the same answers for both. The same answer I have given a few times before, but here we go again. According to every ounce of paleontological evidence anyone has ever dug up anywhere, there is every indication that the further back in time you look, the simpler and more similar living things appear to be, until there are only single cells, and prior to that, there is no evident life of any kind at all. There were no primates 100 million years ago, no mammals 200 million years ago, no dinosaurs 300 million years ago, and no land animals whatsoever 400 million years ago. 500 million years ago, there weren't even the most primitive fish yet. We've never found any trace fossils for macroscopic life forms prior to 700 million years ago, but we do have bacterial microfossils covering another 2.8 billion years prior to the first multicellular anythings we've ever found a trace of. And the only possible explanation or conclusion we can draw from all that is that the most advanced organisms were still only microscopic and microbial for the first 80% of the history of life on this planet. And what we know about the early Earth is that it was much warmer and more radioactive than it is today, a bubbling cauldron cooking complex chemicals. So the first thing we have to know is how inorganic chemicals like amino acids can be formed naturally from inorganic origins. Thanks to Yuri Miller and a number of other similar experiments, we know that water, ammonia, methane, and hydrogen generate amino acids when heated and charged with electricity. The same thing happens when you change the mix to include carbon dioxide, nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide. Similarly, heating water to 70 degrees Celsius in the presence of iron hydroxide, simulating geothermal vents in the anaerobic conditions of the prebiotic earth, also produced amino acids and alpha hydroxy acids in the lab. A separate study showed that synthetic molecules fold up into abiotic proteins, so life is not necessarily the only source of proteins. Then the synthesis of proteinous amino acids and amino acid polymers called proteinoids from inorganic molecules and thermal energy created the world's first potential protocell out of proteinoids and water. Another study showed that redox and pH gradients drive amino acid synthesis in iron oxyhydroxide mineral systems. Alanine and valine, two of the proteinogenic amino acids thought to be among the most abundant of the prebiotic earth, can polymerize into peptides. Further studies show that it is remarkably easy for peptides to subsequently assemble into ordered protein-like two-dimensional structures, amyloids, from basic building blocks. This discovery supports the researchers' hypothesis that primal life could have evolved from amyloids such as these. Because peptides can spontaneously form self-replicating protein structures in the presence of carbonyl sulfide. In a drier environment, say along a shoreline, aqueous microdroplets enable abiotic synthesis and chain extension of unique peptide isomers from free amino acids. They can also dry into polypeptides because some of these chemicals become increasingly complex after repeated cycles of inundation, dehydration, and irradiation. Then once the right phosphate is involved, they become ribonucleotides. If ribonucleotides come into contact with montmorillonite, they spontaneously produce strands of RNA. Scientists at the Foundation for Applied Molecular Evolution announced that ribonucleic acid, RNA, an analog of DNA that was likely the first genetic material for life, also spontaneously forms on basalt lava glass. Further laboratory experiments discovered a primordial soup that yields RNA bases. Activated RNA can replicate itself even without the usual enzyme. Scientists running a long-term RNA replication experiment witnessed the transition from a chemical system towards biological complexity when a single RNA type evolved into multiple variants in a complex replication system. RNA also builds DNA. According to a developmental biologist I know, RNAs have enzymatic activity on their own that DNA lacks, and is an essential component of many cellular processes. Then there's the ribosome, which, right in the name, tells you that it is a ribonucleoprotein and it's essential in protein synthesis, so it's everywhere. A recent study also revealed an origin for a protoribosome, proposed as a link between an RNA-dominated world, one that may have existed before proteins and DNA appeared, and life that is based on proteins and nucleic cells as we know it today. And look at primates. Synthesis of a DNA strand is preceded by laying down a short stretch of RNA in a single-stranded DNA to prime the activity of DNA polymerase, or telomerase, an enzyme that carries an RNA template which is used to make the DNA at the ends of the chromosomes. Then there are spliceosomes. Introns are cut out of DNA by small ribonucleoproteins that chop out and splice the DNA, and some of them are self-splicing. Just the RNA in the intron itself can cut itself out. Biochemists also now know of a ribosome that can use either left or right-handed RNA templates to exclusively synthesize right-handed versions, solving the problem of homochirality. Then, of course, phospholipids automatically form a bilayered cell wall upon contact with water due to their combined polarity, allowing for a haven for all of these processes with transport vesicles and other semi-permeable channels to keep fueling and exchanging the system. So if RNA and then DNA are contained within that incidental arrangement, then we have the basis for the first living cells. Now, scientists have even created a lifelike material that has metabolism and can self-reproduce. Bioengineers have assembled synthesized DNA patterns resulting in lifelike material that can perpetuate a dynamic, autonomous process of growth and decay with an artificial metabolism. More recently, researchers at the Craig Venter Institute have synthesized minimal cells that can grow and divide just like real life. So the development of life turned out to be a long sequence of unrelated processes, with many of them occurring in different conditions or different chemical environments, and not at all like what the wanna believers imagine, not the single-step process of inorganic becomes organic or something dead becomes alive like these people imagined. But more importantly, a lifetime before anyone knew about any of this, our inability to answer those questions then were not evidence for God then. And whatever we still don't know now not evidence for God now. Question number 3. Since we now have life outside of science fiction, there could only be 2 possible explanations: supernatural creation from God or natural spontaneous generation. Since the atheist has vehemently ruled out supernatural creation, they're left with only spontaneous generation. Has spontaneous generation ever been proved? Has it ever been duplicated and observed? No, because abiogenesis, the long sequence of origin of life studies that I just explained, is not the same thing as spontaneous generation. Though I realize that a few common dictionaries written by Christians do conflate these two erroneously. Spontaneous generation was a supernatural belief in George Stahl's 17th century notion of vitalism. And while we now know that what we call life is just an array of chemical reactions, people in the horse and buggy days believed that life was animated by a supernatural life force, and that they said that this vaporous fluid would ebb out of dead material, which caused dead and rotting corpses to stink. And they believed that this life force would rot too, and that as this life force decays, it would magically produce lesser forms of vile organisms like mold, maggots, and mice. And Louis Pasteur disproved this using methodological naturalism, which creationists hate. It does not rule out supernatural creation. Creationists have simply failed to produce sufficient reason to believe their absurd claims, which amount to literally magic. We all accept that there was once a time when there was no life on this planet, and then there was. Scientists say that happened naturally. Science denialists say that happened magically, as a miraculous conjuration by a god wishing things into being. And believers blame their inability to substantiate their own claims onto scientists because scientists don't think that "'cause I said so" is good enough reason to believe anything so ridiculous as what creationists propose. Question number 4. Since macroevolution, not microevolution, is touted as the only explanation for our existence, has there ever been one kind of animal evolved into another kind of animal? Has one transitional fossil ever been discovered? Boy, is this a loaded question. 2 questions, really, loaded with at least 3 faulty assumptions and 1 very wrong assertion. Yes, one transitional fossil had been discovered way back when Darwin was still alive. And since then, thousands more have been discovered, with several hundred of those species just with invertebrates alone. It's sadly typical that creationists don't even understand their own questions. Microevolution is variation within a single species, while macroevolution is variation between species at or above the species level, including the emergence of new species. Prominent creationists like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind now admit that speciation is observed, thus macroevolution is confirmed. But believers don't even know what the words they're using even mean. They often say that they accept microevolution but reject macro, but really they've got it backwards. They usually accept macroevolution because they accept that speciation happens, but they reject microevolution because they refuse to acknowledge the fact that mutations contribute new information to the genome. Whether micro or macro, the exact same mechanisms still apply continuously throughout both levels, so that there is no important distinction between them. The correct way to ask this question is to say that evolution, both micro and macro combined, is the one and only explanation of our existence. The most incorrect thing one could ask for after that is whether one kind of animal ever evolved into another kind, because evolution never taught that and doesn't allow it. Not only is that a gross and deliberately deceptive misrepresentation of evolution, one which violates 2 of the natural laws of evolution, but there's no such thing as a kind either. So every part of this question is wrong. And watch this guy still repeat that same question again months from now without any correction or acknowledgement of error, because religion is make-believe. It ain't about the truth. It's all about lies. So this guy and a bunch of other creationists watching this video will repeat each of these lies in the future. Just watch. You know they will. Question number 5. And you got to love the way that this one is worded. It's full of insane ravings. This question proves that 99% of atheists are only non-logical believers, not because of the evidence, but because of morals, or rather, immorals. Science and biology have nothing to do with what they believe. All of this is just more lies, by the way, as we've already demonstrated. But to continue. So, as an atheist that only believes in materialism and nothing exists outside of what we see, no God, no soul, no spirit, no supernatural, with that being said, one question must be asked. Question: is it biologically possible to be a woman trapped in a man's body? In other words, is it biologically possible for a person's gender to not correspond with his or her birth sex? As I myself am a cisgendered, strictly heterosexual male, I have no background on this at all, as it has nothing to do with atheism or evolution and is consequently entirely outside of my wheelhouse and irrelevant to anything I study. So I turned to another scientist I know, someone whom I know has done research in this area. They told me that biologically, people have tried and failed to make conditions that accurately fit people into two genders. For example, someone has the genitalia of a female but the hormones of a man, or someone who has the chromosomes of a man but has both reproductive organs. Another example can be someone with XXY chromosomes. And when looking into genetics, it becomes even less defined. Most people will have cells of both genders. And when some people tried to exclude other people from sports based on testosterone, they ran into the issue of excluding people who were classified female at birth. When they tried with chromosomes, they excluded people who had intersex chromosomes or people who were male at birth but who have female chromosomes. You define gender by the ability to give birth, then what if people with female sex organs but no uterus? Or what if people who have the female external organs but male internal organs? Scientifically, biological sex and gender are just not binary. And that doesn't even get into the gender role constructs that have changed throughout time. Things that are considered female now were once male in the past, like high heels and pink. End quote. I'm sure that this troll and others of his ilk will be completely unsatisfied with all these answers, even though we can show that they're right. He has some other questions too, this time not dealing with science, but with morality. And again, he doesn't understand anything there either. First, since the atheist believes that morality is subjective and only a social construct, was being gay 150 years ago immoral since society deemed it sinful and wrong? If tomorrow, as a society, they deem it immoral again, will it be? First, as always, my would-be interlocutor is so wrong that I even have to correct his question. Some atheists believe that morality is subjective. I happen to think that it is more objective. The way I understand it is how Scott Clifton put it in his video Treatise on Morality, wherein he said that
a particular action or choice is moral or right when it somehow promotes happiness, well-being, or health, or it somehow minimizes unnecessary harm or suffering, or it does both. A particular action or choice is immoral or wrong when it somehow diminishes happiness, well-being, or health, or it somehow causes unnecessary harm or suffering, or again, it does both.
that is the most succinct yet sublime way I've ever heard that put. We all understand that it is wrong to harm another person if we don't have to, though some will cite their religious bigotry to justify their evil in punishing homosexuality, for example, when there's no real harm done. If it is between consenting adults, there's no victim there. So even when the religious wrong says that what other people do is immoral, that's only their own immoral hypocrisy being imposed upon others. If you cite religion as the sole motivation for any action or policy, then you still have not given a reason. We need something more than just that, something demonstrably real. So if we were to fall under the rule of fundamentalist bigots again, it would still be immoral for them to punish a victimless crime that shouldn't be a crime at all. That would be objectively immoral. Second morality question. If the atheist believes that there is no eternal fixed moral standard, literally saying there is nothing intrinsically evil or wrong, how can anyone say that Hitler was evil? Not if one believes, according to their opinion, he was evil, because it was their social construct to exterminate what they called the weaker races, following a textbook example of survival of the fittest. Are we not dealing with only opinion, since nothing is inherently morally wrong? Hitler was himself a creationist who rejected belief in evolution as a sin against the eternal creator. Hitler didn't believe in Darwin, and Darwin didn't believe in racial superiority, nor in survival of the fittest either. That was Herbert Spencer, not Darwin. So my troll got even that wrong, too. Hitler said that his hatred of the Jews was inspired by religious teaching and not by science. So he was wrong about a lot of things, just like the troll asking this question. As I just explained, we do have inherent right and wrong by that eternal, fixed, objective moral standard that Scott Clifton so eloquently summarized. Hitler clearly was intrinsically morally wrong. Morality is a social construct, but that doesn't make it arbitrary. This is one of the most fundamental norms that are held universally throughout every society, despite whatever excuses despotic rulers or their apologists may attempt to make. Third and final morality question. If one is not intelligent enough to understand that without a fixed eternal standard, nothing is inherently right or wrong, and says, I'm an atheist, but I disagree, if an atheist makes the claim that they believe morality is not subjective, but rather objective, which would be a total contradiction of reality and logic, it's called the law of non-contradiction. It's a law that governs logic. But if one being very confused insists that as an atheist, they do believe in a fixed moral standard, distorting logic and thus distorting reality, and all the atheists believe some actions are inherently evil. So if that is the case, please explain what the eternal fixed moral standard is, outside of morality being a social construct. Not if, but why is anything evil? This is just the same question repeated with a few more erroneous assumptions that I have already addressed and corrected. So there's no reason to answer it again. But I should add that belief in God does not promote morality. Abrahamic religion doesn't even care about morality, not when compared to credulity. In Christianity, especially, morality is largely irrelevant. According to the sacred scriptures, gullibility is the sole criteria for redemption. Beyond that, I should point out that this question is another example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where this guy thinks that he understands logic. Lots of believers think they're being logical when really they're entirely irrational. As I have so often pointed out, every logical fallacy has been used as an argument for God, and every argument for God is a logical fallacy. There are no exceptions that I've ever seen. And some of these arguments, like Paley's watchmaker, Pascal's wager, and the Kalam cosmological argument, have more than one fallacy embedded in them, rendering them all logically invalid. And the most important point of this whole video is this. Each of these questions were wrong because they were all based on multiple erroneous assumptions from ignorance and bigotry. But now that this troll and many others know better, will they correct any of their many errors here? Or do we all already know that they won't? They will still cling to and tell the same lies even when they know that they're lying. You know they will. At least some of them will. And hopefully, at least a few of them may start to feel bad about that and hopefully start to think.